This is Jordan Edwards, and this is the Business Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. Good afternoon, Mike Rogers.
Good afternoon, my man. How we doing?
Very good. Very special podcast today. Mike Rogers is the CEO of Critical Response Group. In all transparency, I am an investor of Critical Response Group. And my father, Glenn, was one of the original seed investors of Critical Response Group before it was even a company. It was just an idea, and he was one of the seed investors. Mike was just telling me offline that it's already 5 years since that time.
Yeah, it's not quick.
And Mike is a very special and capable person. I'm allowed to say that. I don't know if he would say that about himself because he's incredibly humble, but he's former special operator, Army veteran, West Point, New Jersey native, and a great guy that I am very, very, very grateful to call a friend, and extremely grateful that I get to play an extremely teeny tiny part of his company. But Mike, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Same here, Jordan. I really appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you.
So before we get into the business stuff, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what it was like growing up in your family.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a proud New Jersey native, kind of born and raised. And that's really where the family story starts. So my dad, very important to who I am today. And then ultimately, kind of the family backstory. My dad's a 5th generation police officer. So literally for 130 years, that's all everybody has done in my family. Literally every uncle I have on this planet, you're either a police officer or a firefighter. And I'm the first one not to do that. So following 9/11, really wanted to serve in the Army, was fortunate, got into West Point, probably because there was 2 wars going on and they lowered the emission standards for a couple of years and let me slide through.
Told you everybody he was humble.
That's a true story. And but from there, ultimately was very fortunate, graduated, and then did 5 deployments in the Army, 4 to combat, 1 on a humanitarian relief mission, and then ultimately got out. Was very fortunate. Got an assignment teaching military science at Princeton University. Did that for a number of years, and it was a great opportunity. I was really able to take a lot of lessons learned that I was imparted on me during my military service into the next generation of those that served, and then ultimately started the company to take some of the lessons that I had learned overseas and then fulfill a need that I saw in the space. And that was, Critical Response Group was, got started in 2017 and kind of have grown into what we are today.
Incredible. When you were growing up in Jersey, were you playing sports?
I was, yeah. That's all I did was play sports. So throughout high school, I played football, soccer, and I wrestled. Wrestling was my main sport. Mm-hmm. And that was really my passion. And I learned a lot about life. I had, a number of really good wrestling coaches at a young age that kind of, instilled that discipline in me, much like your love of jiu-jitsu, the discipline that comes with that, and ultimately the toughness. There's a lot of life lessons I carried with that. And ultimately, I'm very fortunate. I have 2 beautiful little girls, and I still try to impart a lot of the hustle and the things that come in with that sport into their their daily lives, the discipline associated with being successful in that world. So, and again, a lot of the things that I learned there carried me through, helped me through West Point, and then ultimately into the special operations community. Combatives is a big part of that world, and I had this really strong foundation from a wrestling perspective that was able to kind of carry me through.
Yeah. Did you wrestle at West Point?
I did not. No, that's a top tier, Division I. I got a bunch of buddies that were there, but I was not the caliber to wrestle at that altitude. I actually did a year of preparatory school prior to going to West Point. So West Point has a special program that they'll send you to a military college for 1 year to kind of get your grades up and prepare you in traditional preparatory school. And I did a year of Valley Forge Military College. Mm-hmm. I wrestled there, but ultimately tore my left LCL. Really early in the wrestling season. My goal was to go to West Point. So at that point, I kind of hung that up and walked away at that point in my life.
Yeah, it is. I was talking about that last night with a very dear friend of mine, Randy Brown, who's in the UFC right now, doing well. He's on a 4-fight win streak. And a couple months ago, back in May, I blew my LCL and my PCL. Actually, right around the time that you and I had lunch with Kyle. Kyle Rogers is going to be on my podcast tomorrow. He's the COO of CRG. And Kyle showed up in a huge brace with a torn ACL, and Kyle does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or at least he did before he blew out his ACL. So it's a tough sport. Wrestling is a tough sport. Football's tough, and there's definitely a high injury rate. But I think that the lessons that you learn on those mats or on those fields, they carry over in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kyle is just such a superstar. I'm glad you're having him on tomorrow. It's interesting. We don't think there's any relation between Kyle and I. Our names are spelled the same way. But he did wrestle in college. He wrestled up in, I believe it was up in Rhode Island, but we call him like the Wolverine because when he got hurt, we were like, oh, this dude's going to be down for a number of months. And literally, a month later, he's walking around in the office with like no crutches. So,
is he back to training?
Oh, he's already back to training. He's back to surfing training. He's out of his mind. But just an absolute superstar of a human being.
Yeah, great guy. Yeah, I'm pumped to talk to him too. But yeah, so you're playing sports, you're wrestling, and by the way, New Jersey wrestling scene is no joke. I mean, it's a hotbed for mixed martial arts. It's a hotbed for wrestling. It's a hotbed for jiu-jitsu. I had a couple guys on the podcast, a legendary UFC fighter, Ricardo Almeida, who is one of Renzo Gracie's first black belts in Brazilian jiu-jitsu here in the U.S. And he told me that he put his academy strategically in Jersey so that he would be halfway in between Philadelphia and New York. And the number of killers that come through this region, it's crazy. And then I had another guy on the podcast, Jamie Giovazno, who's the CEO of Eat Clean Bro, another New Jersey business. And he was a big high school wrestler. Just like you, he never took it to the next level, but it's still like a big part of his identity in his life. Wrestling is it really is big in Jersey. I think we know about it. I don't know if on like the major, and I'm sure in the wrestling world they know about it, but people, they don't usually associate New Jersey with wrestling. Like Iowa, I think gets associated with wrestling quite often, but I don't know that Jersey gets the credit it deserves.
Absolutely. From my hometown is Frankie Edgar. And I think it's just ultimately the culture, much like being from the city, you kind of have that scrapping type of mentality that is good and ultimately in the wrestling world.
You must be a little bit older than Frankie Edgar. Around the same, were you?
Yeah, we're the same age.
Same age? Did you wrestle with him growing up?
There's 3 high schools in town. We went to different schools. So I knew of him, just being kind of the tough kid from, across town, but I don't think we ever wrestled each other. We were wrestling, either a division or a weight class above or below each other all the time.
Yeah. So that takes you to the military college and then to West Point. Can you just give like a little brief overview of the kind of discipline and structure that goes on at West Point? Clearly, I don't think that's the typical college experience that they have at, Michigan or Alabama.
Yeah, I would agree that it's not your traditional college experience. It was a great college experience. It was correct for me. Really, all I wanted to do was go in the military, so it was definitely the correct choice. But I always laughed that West Point and I did not get along the whole time I was there. So I did struggle academically when I was there, but I'd say it's because my priorities were not in line. Really unique opportunities when you go to school there, very heavy academic load, but then any type of activity you want to do, you have the opportunity to do. So I rock climbed for 3 years when I was there. I was on a shooting team, like a special operations preparatory team, where I got to shoot 6 days a week with, tremendous, instructors. So I would literally, get up at 5:30, do a little workout, go to, morning formation around 6:30, get breakfast. And then, then you're really in class from, 8 o'clock until about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon with one break in between that usually doing some homework. And then as soon as I would be done with class, I'd run back to my room. I'd get my rock climbing equipment. And then I would run about 2 miles down to the rock climbing location on the water. I would rock climb for about 2 hours. I'd run back to my room. I'd get, change in my different uniform. And then I'd go down to the range and I would shoot really from, 5:30, 6 o'clock until about 9 o'clock at night. Then I'd get into my homework routine around 9:30 until 11:30-ish, bed down and start all over again. And it really did set this great foundation for me in terms of how to manage my time. And, the friendships I've taken out of that university, really served me. And then the life lessons I learned there, just the continual grind and persistence that it took to get through there, really kind of helped set me up for life.
Yeah, I can imagine creating that kind of network in college. You must know quite a few people now who have gone on to do some amazing things, both in the military and now outside the military.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, about half my class is still in, half the class is out, and it's really I'm still very close to a lot of my friends to see what they're doing, and really everybody's the ones that are in the military are still being super successful. You know, a number of my classmates down at Delta Force just doing amazing things for God and country, and then a number of individuals that are in the private sector really tackling the world. There's a tremendous amount of entrepreneurs that have come out of my class. And that's really what's good. Just, you know, the relationship I enjoy with you, Jordan, is, you know, going to be able to wrap back and forth when I have a question. You know, a couple of times we've talked when you gave me great advice on how to establish medical coverage within the company, or how to establish, like, how are you recruiting right now? Like, I enjoy being able to come to you to do that. And then I've got a couple of peers of mine from the academy doing entrepreneurship that I can, you know, kind of bounce some questions off of. So that network I pull is very important.
Yeah, I am looking forward to talking to you about a couple of those things. So we'll pop back into that towards the end of the interview, because I do think that's important. It's something I admire about you tremendously, that you are collecting information. You are not afraid to just ask anybody that might be able to just help you a little. And well, I guess I'll just tell the story now, and then we'll hop back on the normal flow of the interview. I don't know if I'm prepared to tell this story, but I'm walking into 7-Eleven, and I see this guy and a girl outside. They're working for the company Celsius, you know, this like caffeinated water. Kid says, "You want any caffeinated water?" And I just zip right by him. I don't even acknowledge his existence, basically. I go in, I get my coffee at 7-Eleven. I walk out. This kid says, "Hey, do you work at Mixology Clothing Company?" Just like you, for the people who are watching this, they see that Mike's wearing his CRG shirt. I was wearing my Mixology Clothing Company shirt that day. I said, "Yeah, I work at Mixology Clothing Company. I'm the CEO." He said, "Oh, that's so funny. My sister works there, Julia." So now I, of course, stop in my tracks. I turn around and walk over to this kid, handsome kid, engaging me. And we start talking. Turns out, you know, it's the brother of one of my great employees, Julia Cutler. She's amazing. And I start chatting up the kid. "What are you doing?" He says he's just about to graduate. I said, "What's your major?" "Homeland Security," he tells me. I said, "Homeland Security? That's so funny." I said, "Later today, I'm going to have lunch with 2 former special operators who started this incredible company that I'm an investor in." So I said, "Hey, why don't you send me your resume?" I've said that to so many people over the years, you know. Mm-hmm. Barely any of them follow up.
Nobody ever pushes it. Yeah,
so few of these people follow up. And Kyle Cutler followed up with me. I helped him. I worked on his resume with him. And you know, I think outside of the fact that you and I were having lunch right in that time, you also had called me asking, because you were staffing up. You raised some money. I was a part of that round. Very, very grateful to be part of that round, by the way. And you had called me just offhand one day and said, "Hey, how are you recruiting at Mixology? What kind of things are you doing?" And I basically, my essence was, listen, of course you got to work LinkedIn and Indeed, but the best way to do it is family and friends and just putting the word out there. Yeah. And it's, yeah, in the back of my mind is one of the things that made me think to connect this kid. And, you know, listen, maybe it works out with him over the years. Maybe it doesn't work out with him over the years, but you called me. It was in my mind. And then this whole thing came together. Long story short, you ended up hiring Kyle Cutler.
Kyle was a stud. Yeah. And dude, I really respect your opinion for, you know, being able to pick out talent. And I think you cherish the same things that I do when you're, you know, interviewing someone. And it was clear with Kyle that he is not afraid to work. And he's very charismatic, and he was willing to learn. And right now he's on a work trip down the state of Virginia, you know, labeling and walking a number of schools for us. He has just been an absolute superstar. So we're super pumped to have him. So I really appreciate, you know, that intro, because, you know, who knows where it goes for Kyle, but I think you know, only up from here.
I just think it's like such a great business story all around. I've told it so many times on training sessions and calls. He wasn't afraid to say something to me first. I blew him off. He easily could have not said something to me on the way out. He did. He didn't have to follow up with me. He did follow up with me. When he was going through the job interview process, I told him, I said, "I'm just putting a foot in the door. I can't get you this job. You have to get you this job." Mm-hmm. He went through the interview process. He ultimately got the job. And then something that we stress really heavily at my companies is showing gratitude. Now, he's not a part of my company, so I never trained him on any of this, but he ended up sending me an edible arrangement fruit basket. And I was like, wow,
awesome.
This kid he's good. He's good. And he just graduated. So he's very fresh. We all know that when you just get out of college, unless it's from the military in West Point, you don't have all that much experience. But he was an athlete. And he engaged me, and he followed up with his resume. And I said, all those things are enough for me to recommend you to Mike over at CRG. And I'm glad it all worked out, but hopefully it works out for Kyle. He's got a great career either with you or wherever he ends up. I hope I always hope and pray, but more importantly, I love the whole, how the whole thing came together.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the introduction. He's a superstar. And as long as someone's hungry coming out of college, they're going to be really successful. And, that's ultimately where we're looking at. One of the top things I'm looking for when I hire somebody.
Yeah. All right. So that was a good little pit stop on this conversation, but I really would love to learn about the mentality of coming out of West Point and going overseas. You enlisted because of 9/11 and going into a war. As you're learning how to shoot and climb, must know in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind that you are going to war.
To be honest, when I was a sophomore and junior at West Point, the war in Iraq was starting to slow down. And you go to, at least I did, I went to the service academy, not for a free education, because I wanted to serve in the military. I wanted to go overseas and service. And we were a number of my classmates, and I thought the war was going to really end. Kind of nervous about that, but ultimately I graduated 2008. And then really, as I started to hit the Afghanistan cycles, the country was surging into Afghanistan. So just really hit the war in Afghanistan in stride, very kinetic environment during my time over there. But it was, again, the right opportunity for me, to cut my teeth from a leadership perspective.
Yeah. I think we're the exact same age. You're born in 85. You graduated high school in 03 and college in 08.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were on the same track, and I went off to, work, and you went off to war. It's first and foremost, thank you for your service. I say that with complete sincerity.
Thank you.
I think more than ever, where our country is moving away from gratitude for our troops and our freedoms and our safety. And we don't have to talk about that during this conversation, but it means so much to me that you picked that path and did it for me and for everyone. And every time I go to jujitsu, I have a lot of friends in jujitsu that are in the Navy, in the Marines, police, prison guards. And I say it all the time, like I go to work, I sell women's clothes and buy buildings. I mean, that's basically what I do. And these guys go to these jails every day and work these beats. And,
they put it on the line every day.
Yeah. Every day. And you come from a family police officer, so it's not lost on you, and you served overseas. So thank you so much. What kind of lessons did you take with you from West Point overseas?
I think honor and integrity is one of the biggest things that you really beat into you at West Point. There's an honor code, so your character and reputation means so much while you're there. And they have the honor code at West Point, so you learn the importance of what that means, the time management, and then the introduction really to leadership at a low level. So there you're kind of doing peer leadership, which in my opinion is one of the most difficult forms of leadership. So you're practicing that your entire time at West Point. Was able to carry that, and then really fortunate. My first couple assignments. So when I first came out of West Point, I was an artillery officer, and my specialty was on how to control aircraft from the ground. So I'd be the guy on the radio talking to the helicopters that were dropping us off and picking us up, doing medical evacuations. And ultimately, if we were shooting at stuff with an Apache helicopter or a Spectre gunship, I was the individual on the radio doing that. So pretty technical. So I had to go to Oklahoma for about a year to learn how to do that stuff, which was pretty awesome. And then from there, I went to a thing called Ranger School, which is the Army's premier leadership school. So you go there for basically 2 months in an austere environment. I went there in the winter, so it's not necessarily an enjoyable experience. You're outside for basically 2 months. But you learn how to lead individuals under stress, without food, super tired. And it was I took more from that experience than anything, really what is expected of a leader. And then my assignments after that, it was kind of progressional. I got super lucky. My first deployment was to Haiti in 2010 for the earthquake. And I was assigned a small little team kind of off on my own, which is unique at that experience as a young junior officer. Usually you're like Mama Bear and Papa Bear are watching you the whole time. And I was kind of cut loose to the Israeli embassy. And I was working with a team of about 8 American soldiers and a number of nonprofits to build water tanks all throughout Port-au-Prince, Haiti. So like a really unique experience to teach me how to kind of be on my own and lead in an unsupervised environment. And then after that, I came back for about a month, and then I went right to Afghanistan. And again, at that point, I got broken off from my unit and given a small 12-person team and went to the deployment on the Iranian border. So again, not under like the flagship of, the flagpole of being watched by everybody. We're just on this like little outpost, which was a really unique experience for me to understand, it's kind of sink or swim, figured out on my own. But I went from like managing 8 people to managing 12 people on my own. And then ultimately, when I came back from that, I assessed and was selected to serve within special operations. So, yeah.
It's incredible. Did you ever read the book Startup Nation?
I have not read that, no.
Oh, Mike and I have shared books back and forth over time. You gave me a couple great books, and Startup Nation is one I think you should add to your list. It's about why Israel was able to be successful in the face of the most extreme adversity, surrounded on all sides. But one of the things that they talk about in that book is everybody has to serve in the military. And when you get into the military, it doesn't matter if you were rich, if you were poor, if you were light skinned or dark skinned. Once you get into the military, it's a meritocracy. And how much responsibility they give to these young people. By the time they're 18, 19, 20 years old, they do exactly what you just described. 18-year-old kid, okay, now you're the head of this platoon, and all of a sudden you're in charge of 12 people, and you're on the Syrian border making decisions on the front lines. And that is, it's one of the things that they attribute, in this book at least, to the incredible success that this country has had financially. It's like all these kids, they come out of the military with this leadership experience. They're 22 years old. They haven't even gone to college yet, and they know how to lead.
I couldn't agree more. And I look at just my own personal experiences. Like when I did that second deployment, I was 24 years old, like off on my own on a border with like a border crossing position. And it was just an unbelievable experience. And then ultimately I got into special operations. There's about 120, special operators, special rangers, special operations rangers. I was like 20. I was there between 26 and 29 years old. When I left there at 29, I was the second oldest person in the company.
Wow.
So like, you just kind of think of that, like how young the fighting force really is, and the leadership experience that you get. It's very unique and definitely formative for me.
Yeah. I bet by the time that you were 29 and one of the oldest people, you felt old.
Oh my God. Well, one of the things I didn't say, when I was on the rock climbing team at West Point, I fell and broke my back. So I was in a training exercise. Yeah. I fell like off a 5-story cliff, to the point where I had to be like life flighted out, and ultimately recovered. Everything's okay. But those injuries caught back up to me when I was, 29 years old. So.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting. When I was 28, that was really kind of like a formative time for me, where I really started to take the leadership role and run mixology. When I was 29 is when I became the president of mixology. I was leading people in their 40s, 50s, and even into their 60s. And I was like a kid. But I was at this very pivotal time where I was like growing from being a kid. And I had done a lot of things that my natural talent was able to carry through, basic business things that I knew that the business wasn't using, bookkeeping, buying, purchase orders, just basic fundamentals that I added into the business, and the business had a lot of success off those things. But very quickly, my natural talent ran out, and I was getting in fights with my former business partners. I was getting in arguments with my dad. I was doing my best to be the best leader I could be, but it was very clear that I was falling short. And by accident, my dad recommended I read the book by Tony Robbins called Money. And that fundamentally changed my perspective on learning. And it basically had this moment where I said, I'm the asshole. They're not the asshole. I'm the asshole. I need to learn. And luckily I'd started jujitsu by then, so I was very familiar with tapping out. And I went on this path of self-discovery through books and reading. And one of my favorite things to read about was military figures, generals, Navy SEALs, special operators like yourself. I found the work of Jocko Willink in his book, Extreme Ownership. And all of these stories about leadership and the kind of experiences that you lived were formative to help me turn from a young kid into a man, and really kind of begin to hit my stride and grow these businesses. And one thing I learned, it's funny, you brought this up when you were talking about being an artillery officer, communicating with helicopters. When I went to take this was more recent than maybe in the past year, but I went to go take a course with Jocko's organization, Echelon Front. And one of the case studies that they brought up was about communications equipment and how bureaucratic communications can be in these large military organizations, and being able to communicate across different departments or different branches of service, or you want to communicate with the Air Force, but now it's hard to do that. And it never, I obviously can only sympathize with those issues, but in Echelon Front, his organization, they were saying like these things happen in business. And in business, I found that communicating is so critical. It is so important. Now, Absolutely. When you're selling a dress, it's not life or death. When you're landing a helicopter, it's of course a life and death situation. Yeah. But those lessons have been so important to me. And so I wonder, now you're getting ready to start departing the military. I think you go and you going to go work in the private sector. How is this transition? Are you starting to see parallels as you go into the workforce?
Oh my God, yeah. The parallels, the importance of communication, I think, are exactly the same from the military to the business world. And I'd say communication is really one of the most important things as a senior leader you can bring to an organization, is to kind of remove some of the barriers and make sure people are properly communicating. We have this saying, when you're talking to a helicopter, clear and concise is short and nice. So don't say too much. If you can say it in 5 words, don't say it in 50. But one of the things I was very fortunate when I showed up to special operations, now I had come out of the regular Army, and to your point, it was very bureaucratic, very difficult for everybody to communicate, interagency, interbranch. And I was used to seeing that when I served in the 82nd Airborne. When I showed up in the special operations, so Joint Special Operations community, they would, General McChrystal had transformed the way in which that organization communicated from high to low, and ultimately entrusting subordinate leaders to make decisions after you give them kind of left and right limits. And I got to see how special operations manage their communications. And every day they call it a BUB, a battle update brief, where they basically brief out the entire organization, all agencies, in about 15 minutes. Multiple different theaters, multiple continents, people log into a video call and they do that. So, I like to just kind of take what I had learned and apply it. So now in our company, we use a lot of the same, military leadership communication styles and techniques that we learned over there. So like there's a weekly sales stand-up, multiple times there's an operations stand-up, and it's really quick. Everybody's going through their points, their points of friction and kind of resources required. But it's super succinct and, kind of flattens the communication, because that's one of the biggest things, is how does the person who's at the lower end of the organization, who most realistically has the most important information that you need to make a decision, how do you flatten the communication so from a leadership perspective, what's in their head and what their opinions are? So it's about, I think, creating an environment and a culture that you can, people are, clear to communicate across all lines.
There's a business joke that I sometimes tell to drive this point home. And it says, when you're the top monkey on the tree and you look down, all you see is smiles. But when you're the bottom monkey on the tree and you look up, all you see is assholes. Yeah. And that, what you said about layering it into good communication and being able to get information from the front line, you have to do everything as a leader to break that terrible cycle. Bureaucratic organizations and companies, the bigger they get, the more levels of management that get layered in, the harder it is to get the real, true information. And I've experienced that so many times where I want to get to the part of a problem and I go around and I ask everybody, what's going on? What's going on? Everything's great. It's like, if you're a charismatic leader and you treat people well, then they don't want to give you bad news, or they don't want to give you bad news because they don't want to be looked on, unfavorably, or they don't want to be, the person that's always complaining. And so sometimes as the leader, you find out things last. You're the last person to find out that actually these two people are fighting, or these two people are miserable. And so part of building a big organization, from my perspective, and communication has been, how do you build trust at all layers, and how do you create a communication mechanism so that you can find out really what's going on, so then you can make really good decisions. Yep. And so much of that was influenced in me by reading military books and even watching shows. Like, I think that Band of Brothers, which was a Steven Spielberg movie, did like an amazing job at illustrating this at the different levels. There was a show on HBO called Generation Kill, and it was also a really good book about the Marines. And I thought that the book and the movie, miniseries, did a really good job illustrating that you have frontline troops, you have platoon leaders, you have middle managers, then it goes all the way up. And I think that there's so many lessons to be learned about how to run an effective company by studying military.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think really they've created the system just over lots of repetitions of hundreds of years of how to lead in those difficult environments. So we need to be carrying those lessons forward. But I agree when you talk about the importance of communication and how flat it needs to be. I think that's the responsibility of the leader to create an environment, to create a culture where that's acceptable. And one of the things that we stress to our junior leaders in our company is that the 4 or 5 people that work for you, that's your family. That is your responsibility. And if there's an issue with one of them, the expectation is you make a decision at your altitude to take care of your people and then communicate it higher. And then every quarter we do like a company-wide all hands, and I give everybody this is what we did revenue-wise last year, last quarter, this was our burn. We overshare lots of information that people would say that you should not be sharing that to every member of the organization. We overshare. But what that's done is I'll also use that opportunity to call out great stories of people taking care of their people. So, this person had an issue with a family member, and I made it, and Billy gave him 2 days off just to fix their family stuff, and didn't ask for permission. That's exactly what you're supposed to do, and kind of just fester that environment.
That's awesome. Yeah, that reminds me of a saying that I have at my companies, which is, you don't need my permission to make a good decision. If I don't agree with you after the fact, I'll talk to you and you're not going to get in trouble. I'd rather have you make the decision, even if it's not the decision that I would have made, or if I think it's wrong, I'll share that with you. But I hope our relationship is good enough that we can talk about it. Yep. I want to share a little video right now just to kick off the conversation about your company, CRG. I'm going to pull up this video. I think it'll just illustrate well. Of course, there's people listening to this, and we'll describe it afterwards. But I think this is a nice little video clip.
Now, our whole company is based on adapting a technique used overseas, a gridded reference graphic, GRG. Now, this is a technique and tool that's been battle-proven. It's been used thousands and thousands of times on every operation conducted by Special Operations. I've never gone out the door on a mission without a GRG in my pocket. And it's been used on every operation in the last 2 decades, to include the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan.
I've been shot at hundreds of times in my life, and I don't think there's ever been a time where I haven't had one of these GRGs or these maps in front of me. And you wouldn't leave and go on a mission without it. It'd be like leaving and going out on an operation without body armor or a helmet. When bullets are flying or when people are wounded and there's a great deal of stress, it's something that's extremely simple to be able to communicate location. And that's not that much different than a domestic crisis response.
Coming back from overseas, we were shocked to learn that no one had ever heard of this technique, or no one was using it. No one had heard of a GRG. So we went and found a way to make these products just like the ones we used overseas. The United States is far different from Iraq and Afghanistan, so we had to make our products a little different, tailor it to people that are going to be using it. And so we changed them so much they're no longer a GRG, they're a CRG, a collaborative response graphic for local law enforcement and everyone to work together. We build these products with high-resolution aerial imagery, a grid overlay, accurate floor plans geo-registered, highlighted hallways, and this takes all the guesswork out of communicating, whether it's with teachers, with janitors, firemen, with policemen, EMS, with whomever else. Everyone can look at the same piece of paper. They can communicate in just a couple of seconds.
I've noticed while I was showing this video that it was a couple years old at this point. Is that still representative of what you do today?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's I'd say we're better at it and more efficient at it than we were when we started it a number of years ago.
Yeah.
But the premise is still very much the same. It's to take a mapping technique used to plan special operations missions, and then we converted it for domestic purposes. And then through that process, realized that all the blueprints and building schematics across the country are inaccurate and not accessible, and found a way to fix those and integrate it into the mapping.
Yeah. In 2004, my dad took my best friend and I, Gavin Crescenzo, skiing. I think we were going to Aspen or Salt Lake City. So I can't remember exactly where, but I remember sitting in the airport with my dad, and he said to us, if you want to be a billionaire, you should go into education reform, clean energy, or something clean and green, or security. He said, these are going to be industries that are going to define the next 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And he hadn't made any investments at that time in any of these fields. But over the course of those past 15, that was almost 20 years ago, he has made a number of investments across all those different industries. When he learned about your company, or the company that you were getting ready to start, he was so excited to have the opportunity and to work with you. And I'll never forget, he's like, you're going to love this guy, Mike. He's unbelievable. He's just like the books that you read. And he made a bet on you when this was just a concept, just an idea. And it's amazing. That's 5 years has gone by and you have brought life into this company. And now it's not just for schools as it showed in there, but this is for any kind of public infrastructure, right? Any kind of building. So maybe you could just add on to that video a little and give us a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So like what I was saying is, the military came up with this mapping technique. Ethan, who's kind of shown in that video, was my platoon sergeant in special operations. So basically the mommy daddy pair for about 60 Rangers within a special operations platoon. So Ethan and I had unique experiences growing up together in the military. And I always said, if I was to start a trash company or trying to put somebody on the moon, Ethan would be the first person I wanted to do that with. So when I had the idea for the business, and really the inspiration behind it was my wife was a third grade teacher at the time. And my family coming from all law enforcement, I started asking questions. When she came, we moved back to Jersey after I got out. I was teaching at Princeton and she was teaching. I said, well, if a bad thing happens at your school, how do the police officers know where your room is? So I kind of just asked an open-ended question, and we kind of started to peel the onion layers back and realized that the police department didn't have the floor plans of her school. Like, well, why? Like, well, they're inaccurate. There's only one copy. Why? And then that why turned into like, let's solve this problem. And I reached out to Ethan and said, okay, because he got really hurt on a deployment. So Ethan's a Silver Star recipient too. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't know.
So he got pretty banged up overseas. He was getting better. And I had this idea. I went to him and said, okay, if you make it, I'll do the business stuff. And we shook hands and the whole thing kind of took off. So initially it started just for schools, and that still remains really the moral underpinnings of the business. There are 4 states right now where we're mapping pretty much every single public and charter school in those states. There's a number of other states that are moving down that process where we're mapping either a quarter of the schools or something like that. But after the schools start to get mapped, it really bleeds into lots of other pieces of critical infrastructure and private infrastructure. We've done lots of airports, lots of sporting venues, tons of high rises. We're doing lots of work in New York City right now, lots of places of worship, parks. We're really limited by our imagination of the mapping data that we build. But what's different is we pride ourselves on being truly operational. And when we built out the company, I'd say we've built it backwards compared to every other tech company. So we started as 2 Rangers, and then we added on a couple police officers so we could take our experience out of the military, then really understand the problem set that we were trying to fix. Like, what is the working operating environment that a police officer, firefighter, public safety professional uses every day? So we had that institutional knowledge. Then we developed this thing to really solve the problem that they had. And then we built out the technical apparatus to scale it. So we understood our problem really well before we built the solution. And as I've seen other companies in the space try to get in here, they're building a solution before they understand the problem. And that's what's made us a little bit different. But I say all this because when we build our maps, we make sure the maps go into the systems that are used by public safety. Police officer in the country today, they know how to use 3 or 4 different, software platforms. I don't want them to know how to use a 5th one. Use the 4 that you have. I'll integrate it directly into that. So it's really easy for them to understand. And because of that, they appreciate it, and they become our, the loudest endorsers of our product.
That's exactly why I brought up the subject before of communication. Being able to effectively communicate the most important information in your business. You are in the business now of being able to communicate in a life or death situation, the most important critical data from what's going on inside of a school, an active shooter situation, a fire, some terrible thing is happening, a terrorist attack, and emergency responders need to get to a specific point. And that's the problem that you're solving. I mean, it's truly incredible.
Yep.
And you're doing it in such a way that or at least trying to break through some of these bureaucracies of having 4 or 5 different systems. And
yep. Yeah. And that's the operating environment. And what is really cool about the direction we take it, because we're pulling from our experiences in the military. And what war has taught me is that war provides this really interesting, complex laboratory to solve problems. When you go back to Vietnam taught our country trauma management, because there were so many soldiers getting hurt in the battlefield. They had to reimagine, redefine how they save a life. Well, those lessons came home. That's ultimately what led to the development of level 1 trauma centers across the country. Before Vietnam, no level 1 trauma centers. Post-Vietnam, level 1 trauma centers. What we figured out during the war, when I had the opportunity to serve, was every night we'd go conduct a mission. We'd go to a location we had never been to before, under stress. How would we communicate and navigate when you were lost? The simple map. So it's the same problem set facing our nation's responders. We just had this really unique experience because we were forced to solve it overseas.
Yeah. So now that you're scaling this business, what are some of the new challenges that you're facing that maybe you didn't expect or that you weren't prepared for in the military? I mean, we talked about recruiting as one example. Yeah. What are some of these civilian problems or dealing with non-veterans, non-special operators that you're coming across?
Yeah. When we first started this, it was, all law enforcement, all military. Now that's by far the minority inside of our company. And we're very proud. We've grown to this super, just awesome team of people coming from all different backgrounds. We have a super technical workforce, a super artistic workforce, because a lot of the work that we're doing, it takes, an artist to go in there and make it look great. And I will say that this has been by far the hardest thing I've ever done, running a business, way harder than the military experience that I had, more challenging. And I would say from scaling a company has been extremely difficult. We have quadrupled in size this year, in a revenue perspective, but also a personnel perspective. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of, how do you do that as efficiently as possible? How do you spend appropriately? And just, trying to maintain the culture that we started with and grow that. That's been we've been very successful at that to this point, but it's something I watch very closely. But the recruiting is a big thing. Like we just literally stood up healthcare earlier this week. So the point I was making earlier when I was calling you, trying to figure out how do we do this? Because there's lots of books on this. But there's no answer to every company. Every company's we had a very unique profile. I've got a ton of disabled veterans on my team. I have a ton of police officers with pensions. And then I've got a very young workforce that's age 23 to 26. So from a healthcare perspective, literally opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you put something in place that makes sense for everybody? So that's been interesting.
Solving technical business problems is something that as a founder, as a CEO, can feel so lonely. Like, I'm the first person to ever have to deal with these problems. But then you remind yourself, oh, wait, there's literally tens or hundreds of thousands of businesses out there. And clearly people are solving these problems, So sometimes when I get that feeling, I've often said this to myself in my deepest, darkest moments when I feel like I just want to give up. If they did it, I feel like I could do it. I was never, like you said, you didn't have the best grades at West Point. I never had the best grades. I was a bad test taker. I'm still a bad test taker. I was great at projects. I was great at presenting. Had a great interpersonal relationship with my teachers and my peers. I had good qualities, but the quality that I think I always felt I had was, I'm going to figure it out. I'm just going to figure it out. I'm a tinkerer.
Yep.
My best friend and roommate in college, Sam Zeises, I think he did the least amount of work possible to get a college graduate. And what he would always say to me was, I rather work harder not to do the work than actually just do the work. And it turns out that that's actually a really good attitude for being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's a fact. No, I love it. And there's an old, Darwin say, it's like the strongest, not the strongest or the most intelligent. It's the ones who survive are the ones that are most adaptive.
Yes.
And I think that, especially when you look at how your business has grown, like the last 3 years have not been the easiest to manage a business with a worldwide pandemic. We map schools for a living, shutting all the schools down, not being able to walk them. Every state had it differently. So, and that was one of the main things I learned in the military was there's a saying that no plan survives initial contact, meaning you could have like the best plan in the world. You start getting shot at. It's your responsibility as the boss to, deviate to be successful.
Yeah. Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face.
Yeah, that's a fact.
My dad, talking about those past 3 years, is such an optimist. He's never had an operating role at Mixology, our clothing company. He's just been the 30,000 foot view chairman role. But one of the things that he's always been for me is just this force of optimism and pushing forward. My wife and I had lunch with him on this past Saturday. By the way, tomorrow is our 5-year anniversary, my wife and I.
Hey, congrats.
Thank you. And he said, isn't it amazing what you've both accomplished in 5 years? My wife graduated from medical school and did her residency and got a job. We had 2 kids. We bought a house. And it was like such a happy conversation. And we were only thinking about the good things, which is an amazing attitude. But if you overlay that on the backdrop of what's going on in the world, COVID, George Floyd, inflation, all the bullshit that people talk about, Ukraine, crime in the city, he never thinks about those things. And I think that's how you grow businesses in tough times.
Yep.
Those are the best opportunities in business are when other people are retreating and they're giving up. 600,000 businesses went dark on the heels of COVID, and the businesses that didn't go out are the ones that are able to, seize on that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. Your dad is someone I respect. He's been a mentor of mine for a number of years. And to your point, he is always so positive, so encouraging through everything. And he's always looking down the field for me, which is so great. I'll talk to your dad about once a week. We'll have a quick, 5-minute less than conversation. Like, hey, sir, this is that, kind of run some numbers real quick. And he's always like 3 months ahead of a problem. He's like, you should be thinking about this. What do you even talk? I don't know what that is. Yeah. And then, 3 months later, I'm like, oh my God, like he was like prophet. He's done to me multiple occasions. And I remember him talking to me about HR. And he had this great comment. He's like, HR doesn't matter until you're at, and I was like at 29 people at this time. He's like, it doesn't matter now. It's going to matter at 30. It's like, I don't know. He's like, no, it's going to matter at 30. And to his credit, like one person more, it really mattered. And there's just been so many things like that he's kind of looking downfield and been such a great, source of information for us.
Yeah. In his words, he would say, it's not that I'm a genius. It's just that I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, and I'm sure as you've gotten older, and you just have the answers to questions because of experience. You've been through things, and if you can give yourself credit for what you know, and then have a good understanding of what you don't know and go seek that out, that's been a good recipe for finding success for me. And I know it has been for you too.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't be afraid to ask questions. And we have this, one of the big things I learned in the military was this concept of humble confidence.
Yep.
That's really what I've looked at as like a really great leader, is someone who's humble, but also has the confidence to come in there and command the room, but be kind of quiet about it. And, but be confident to say that you don't know something. I think that's an very important thing for people.
Yeah. Well, Mike, what an honor it is to be, like I mentioned, an extremely small part of your company. I'm so excited to go on the ride with you.
Thank you.
I will always be there for you for any small thing that you need. Here's the website of the company, crgplans.com. Anybody out there who is in a school administrative, or if you have a role in a local government or state government, this is the technology that you should be using to future-proof your location, building, organization against threats of any kind, big and small. And I just love watching your story unfold and continue to grow. And thank you for being a friend.
Thanks,
and
brother.
now being a friend of the podcast.
Thanks, brother. I really appreciate it.
Well, I will talk to you very soon. And if I could be of service to you, you know where to find me.
Same. Always here.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Bill.